Started the meeting.
Okay, I'll
Sorry.
have to do it later. Joe, can you turn your camera on for a quick second? All right, we'll just take a quick photo. You guys ready?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, let's try again. Someone was touching their face. Let's try again. And here we go. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
And here we are. 11 o'clock. Are we ready to go?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to November. I can't believe it's November already, and Native American Heritage Month. We are so excited that you're here, and we're looking forward to our discussion focused on the Indigenized employer, welcoming, growing, and sustaining Native talent in Minnesota. Native Americans represent a growing yet underutilized segment in Minnesota's workforce, particularly in Greater Minnesota. Many Native individuals are ready and eager to work, but continue to face systemic barriers that limit access to employment opportunities. As employers, you have a powerful role to play in bridging that gap. And by doing so, you not only support equity and inclusion, but also gain access to a very motivated, loyal, and resilient workforce. Native employees bring unique cultural insights, strong community values, adaptability, and a deep respect for teamwork, qualities that enhance collaboration, innovation, and overall team performance. Research consistently shows that diverse teams are more productive and profitable. Today, we'll hear from experts who share actionable ways you can begin building meaningful relationships with Native American communities and how to support, recruit, and retain skilled Native job seekers. I am truly excited to learn right alongside you and gain insights from our incredible guests that we have here today with us. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm the Director of Workforce Strategy for the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, and we are very, very happy to have you here with us today. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining us, and if you're returning, thank you for coming back. To kick things off, please let us know who you are, your role, where you work, and share about an experience attending a Native cultural event and what stood out to you. And I will start. There is an annual powwow in my community in Mankato called the Mikado Wachipi, which means they dance in Dakota. I try to attend every year with my family, and when my kids were young, they would like to join in the dancing, and I'd always try to pull them back because I didn't want them to be distracting to all the participants and take away from the dancers. But no, that wasn't the way. I learned very quickly. Not only were my children welcomed and joining in the dancing, they were pulled into the circles and taught by the elders. This is a core memory, not only for me, but for my boys, and a huge lesson in the power of bringing people into your circles. And now my boys look every year for their Native friends who taught them to dance. So I'd love to hear your experiences and if there's anything that has stood out to you and created any of your core memories. Our team of consultants work regionally, which means that each consultant will have a slightly different way that they do their work based on the region and the employers that they're serving in those regions. But the common core ways that we support employers are identified here. We work with you to discover gaps in your current strategies and ensure that you're connected with your local, regional, and state workforce partners. And then we assist you in building out strategies that will help you attract and retain workforce. As you will learn today, our consultation process is rooted and informed by data and is developed specifically with your company's needs and goals in mind. We serve as your guide through the process and then convene workforce partners for support and share training grant opportunities and continually check in to ensure that progress is being made on those strategies. And then we assist in making adjustments along the way and look for those continuous improvement opportunities. When you work with us, you are automatically connected to a wide network of people and partners who work collaboratively for the success of our state and our regions and our communities so that your business and our workforce can thrive. We do not do this work alone. It takes many people to bring success to these efforts. A lot of them are going to be in the audience here today. You will see on this next slide that our year is coming to a close, and I can't believe it. We are putting the finishing touches on the 2026 lineup, and we'll have our sessions ready on the website shortly and open and available for registration. We incorporated your feedback into these topics, and we'll continue to weave your needs into sessions as we go throughout the rest of this year and into next year. Speaking of that, I would like to take a moment to encourage you to fill out the evaluation at the end of our time here together. We'll get that link popped into the chat as always. And this is the perfect opportunity for you to share your thoughts on these sessions and let us know what you find valuable so that we can continue to build on that. As always, these webinars are recorded and available to view at any time via YouTube, as well as our careerforcemn.gov website, where you will also find recordings and resources from this session, as well as all of our previous sessions. We will be utilizing our chat feature today throughout our time. Please ask questions, answer questions, and interact with our guests, consultants, partners, and each other. We really do want to continue to build upon the community that we started here and welcome your engagement. And you'll see at the top, there is a Q&A function, which just makes it easier for us to pull out those questions that you have. So try to use that when you are asking questions versus just engaging with each other in the chat. Before I hand things over to our host for today, I wanted to take a minute to acknowledge and thank the 11 sovereign tribal nations of Minnesota, our Dakota and Ojibwe nations, for their enduring contributions to our state's economy, our communities, and our shared future. These nations have always been centers of innovation, trade, and knowledge, and their commitment to stewardship, to family, and to community continues to shape Minnesota's workforce and enrich our culture in ways that benefit all of us. I am deeply grateful for the chance to do this work alongside our Indigenous neighbors and leaders, and for DEED's ongoing commitment to strengthening our relationship with tribal communities across the state. We have a very packed agenda today with speakers who have dedicated their careers to being change makers and culture shakers, and I am so excited for you to meet them. So without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce you to James Whirlwind Soldier, our Northwest Workforce Strategy Consultant. James.
Jessica, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks to our panelists. Robert Blake is still coming. He's doing another panel discussion right now and moving over here. So we'll see him in a split second. But again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us to this month's Workforce Wednesday. Now, before I get started, I want to apologize right away for all my busy slides. I typically prefer them to be more of a billboard than a dictionary, but we decided we wanted to get as much information to you as possible so that after the conversation, if you want to drill down, learn more, explore any of these topics, you should have enough information in front of you to do that or reach out to someone that can help you. Today's theme, as you know, is the Indigenized Employer, welcoming, growing, and sustaining Native talent in Minnesota. And I can't think of three better people to help us explore what that really means. Together, they'll help us think about how workforce, education, and employers can work beyond inclusivity, towards more of a partnership, towards reciprocity, and towards sovereignty. We will be sending out a one-pager with our follow-up email regarding what does it really mean to be an employer of choice. We'll have a checklist and even a 90-day action plan to start doing this really good work. So thank you all very much, and let's get started here. Our agenda today, we're going to do a little bit of a level set, right? We're going to talk about what sovereignty is. We're going to talk about data sovereignty. We're going to talk about how that leads into economic reconciliation and how we as employers, educators, and workforce developers can embrace that idea. We'll talk about a few other key concepts, and then we'll jump right into our panelists. As we come to a close, I'm going to pass it to Shayla Drake, our workforce strategy consultant for the Northeast, who will introduce next month's event, and then she'll pass the mic over to Becky Zubek, who is the workforce strategy consultant for the Southeast. So let's go and get started. As you can see on this map, Minnesota is extremely lucky to share borders with 11 sovereign nations. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty is the inherent right of native nations to govern themselves and to make their own laws. It existed before these nations, exists before these nations were self-governing, long before the United States was founded. Tribal sovereignty is recognized through treaties, the U.S. Constitution, and federal law, affirming a government-to-government relationship. At its core, it means native nations have the authority to shape its own futures and protect their people, lands, and cultures. Is that accurate? We're going to drill down into that a little bit and give ourselves a little bit of a history lesson. We have Dr. Joe Hobart and Dr. Evie Campbell, both who are much more educated on these sorts of things than I am, but I'm going to do my best here in the first few minutes of our Workforce Wednesday. You might be noticing that the green northern Ojibwe nations are considered reservations, but the Dakota nations in Minnesota are called communities. So what is that all about, right? Why are some called communities and why are some called reservations? In essence, our Ojibwe nations signed formal treaties with the U.S. government in the 1800s that established reservations. The Dakota nations did the same thing, but in the aftermath of the U.S.-Dakota Wars of 1862, the U.S. government actually abolished Dakota treaties and expelled many Dakotas from the state. Inevitably, there was land set aside for our Dakota relatives within the state, but you still see that difference playing out in language and vocabulary that we still use. So this, oops, sorry about that, 1 second here. So this difference really stems from how and when each group's land-based and government-to-government relationship was defined by the United States. Both Dakota communities and Ojibwe reservations function as tribal nations, sovereign governments with elected councils, jurisdiction over their own land, and direct relationships with federal and state governments. The naming difference reflects historical trauma and political realities, and not a difference in legitimacy or sovereignty. So let's take a second and just talk about one aspect of sovereignty, and that's data sovereignty. Data sovereignty is the right of Indigenous nations to govern the collection, ownership, and application of data about their people, lands, and resources. It extends the principle of tribal sovereignty into the digital and informational age, ensuring that data about Native communities is managed by, for, and with those communities. Like land, water, and language, data is a resource, right? And how it's used can either be used to reinforce or undermine self-determination. So as an employer, as an educator, as a public servant, as a workforce developer, how do we honor data sovereignty? So first off, we get involved with the individuals that we want to study or we want to learn about or we want to collect data from, whatever. Make sure that we make those relationships, those connections, so that we can, so that they can maintain ownership of that data, right? We should co-create metrics of success, right? What does it mean to be success? What is our return? You know, not everything translates cleanly from one culture to another. I always think about the term generational wealth. Right? There's a couple of things about that make it a little bit difficult, but that's a term we use a lot at DEED. And so creating these relationships, these partnerships, these friendships can help us understand what a concept of success looks like from culture to culture. Build equitable data sharing agreements, right? Memorandums of understanding and frameworks so that this work can be sustainable. Invest in indigenous data capacity. Help support those processes, those sponsorships, those partnerships so that Indigenous data sharing and understanding can grow. And then amplify Indigenous voices in workforce narratives. This is very, very important, right? We need to understand what the story being told is from both a cultural and historical context. One thing we're going to throw, Della's throwing in the chat for us right now is Understand Native Minnesota. Which is an organization that's working to retell the narrative of Indigenous students in Minnesota. So there's really great work happening in this area. So, but one question that comes up, and this relates to that first slide when we define sovereignty and our Native nations, is why is this concept of sovereignty always coming up? Why is this always a challenge? Well, because in 1871, and the history lesson won't last this whole time. In 1871, Congress quietly inserted a single paragraph into the Indians Appropriations Act, a funding bill for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That one sentence redefined Native nations from partners to wards of the state. The effects of that decision still shape how sovereignty and determination are seen today. So let's drill down in this Indians Appropriations Act in 1871, just briefly. Again, knowing that you can drill down later if you are so inclined. What this essentially did is end all treaty making between Native nations and the US government, because the United States would no longer negotiate with tribes as equals, but as dependents and in need of assimilation. As officially defined as wards of the state, the government could change or ignore an agreement or statute it wanted to at will. It didn't end sovereignty. Remember, sovereignty came before any nations existed, but it ended that respect for it, right? It placed sovereignty existed, but for a ward of the state. And so our work today, the work of everybody in this room, having this conversation, simply listening, right, is helping to build that relationship back up again. And that leads us to how we're going to do that, and that's through economic reconciliation. Economic reconciliation means repairing the economic relationship between Indigenous nations and the systems that benefited from their lands. Labor, knowledge, and building a shared future rooted in fairness and respect. Economic reconciliation means restoring the balance through opportunity, respect, and shared prosperity. And we can do this through a few different areas. Number one, acknowledgement, right? Recognize that many of today's economic systems grew from broken treaties, land loss, and exclusion from Native people. And if we can be totally honest, also with attempted cultural genocide, right? We've all heard the term kill the Indian, save the man. It's important that we as individuals within our own governmental and community systems acknowledge some of these wrongs and face that sense of generational guilt and shame that we all have head on, and transform that into a greater sense of responsibility for the future. Restoration and partnerships, right? I am still discovering amazing, innovative, and pioneering activities happening across our state by Indigenous leaders and people, our Native relatives. So we should do everything we can to give them the ball, right? Pass the ball to them. They're the ones with the systems and the programs and the opportunities and the ideas that they can take forward. And then last but not least is generational impact, right? It's about dismantling and rebuilding equitable systems that can last into the future, but through that spirit of partnership. So that was a lot. Okay, so let's get started with this panel discussion. We have three amazing people here today talking. We have Dr. Evie Campbell, Mr. Robert Blake, and Dr. Joe Hobart. So I'm going to go ahead and give introductions real quick, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. So Evie is the Human Services Director of the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, where she is responsible for the overall administration and management of programs under the Human Service Division for 6 of the 7 Ojibwe nations across Minnesota. She is also responsible for the oversight of the licensure of behavioral health treatment facilities located on the 6 Minnesota Chippewa Tribe reservations. Her professional career includes 15 years of teaching experience at Bemidji State University and the University of Minnesota Duluth. Evie is an enrolled member of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe and is knowledgeable about traditional American Indian culture, values, and way of life. Her work with the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe has helped families who face multiple barriers finding and keeping employment, as well as working with elderly programs located in tribal communities. Evie oversees the Native American curriculum training, where she is responsible for assisting with revising and updating curriculum, as well as providing the training to healthcare professionals working with American Indian families. Evie is an accomplished researcher and writer with several publications, as well as presentations conducted at the local, regional, and national level on issues impacting American Indian families. And Evie's been a mentor for me for a long time in my role, and I just really appreciate her guidance through all of this and that she's here today. Next, I want to introduce Robert Blake. Robert Blake is a Red Lake Nation tribal citizen. He's often called a solar entrepreneur and social impact innovator. He's the founder and owner of Solar Bear. It's a solar installation and renewable energy development company located in Minneapolis. Solar Bear is the only Indigenous-owned solar installation firm in Minnesota that's out of 146 solar installation companies. Solar Bear supports tribal nations in achieving energy independence and economic development through solar microgrids and renewable systems. Bob and his team support our relatives and communities through job training, career opportunities, and programs that target people facing employment barriers, including people in lower economic classes, the Indigenous workforce, and the second chance or fair chance workforce. Robert is also the executive director of Native Son Community Power Development, a nonprofit located in Minneapolis. Native Son's mission centers on promoting renewable energy, energy efficiency, and just, equitable, and sustainable energy transitions for Indigenous communities and other unserved populations. A key part of Native Son's work is helping tribes gain more control over their energy systems, moving away from solely purchasing externally generated power towards ownership, local jobs, and local decision-making. And finally, Dr. Joe Hobart. Joe is a descendant of the Hunkpapa band of the Lakota Nation from Standing Rock Indian Reservation, where his grandfather and mother are both enrolled members. Dr. Hobart has worked at the American Indian OIC since 2006, a nonprofit specializing in workforce development, education, and advocacy for the urban American Indian community of the Minneapolis-St. Paul region in Minnesota, where he currently serves as the president and CEO. Dr. Hobart also serves as an adjunct faculty member for the Fairmouth Institute, providing national on-site trainings throughout Indian country for tribal leadership, tribal governance, and tribal administrations. Dr. Hobart also serves in an ongoing capacity as a consultant with the National Urban Indian Family Coalition based in Seattle, where in the fall of 2017, he published a report commissioned by the NUIFC entitled Resurgence, Restructuring Urban American Indian Education. Dr. Hobart's many awards include the Minnesota American Indian Chamber of Commerce's Bear Award. He was an 40 under 40 honoree by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal, a fellow at the Roy Wilkins Center for Human Relations and Social Justice at the University of Minnesota. He was also selected for an Aspen Institute Ascend Fellowship, and in December of 2019, Joe was selected by the Twin Cities Business Magazine as 100 People to Know in 2020. So thank you all so very, very much for coming. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to start this conversation. All right, so thank you all for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's just dive right in, right? We spent enough time with talking about all these other little things. So Evie, can I start with you?
Yes, good morning, James. Thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, so knowing how your intersection works with regard to education and service, how can tribal services and higher education work together to ensure that students don't just graduate from school, but transition into good jobs with strong supports in place?
Okay, so I believe it does start with our youth. So when I was working at UMD, we had several programs that brought youth onto campus. So for example, in the med school, they actually have a 2-week curriculum where they bring students from the community, from the reservations in the state, and they have they meet with faculty and they go over, like, they teach them classes that they would be taking if they were going into med. Like it could be a biology class, a math class. And so students get hands-on experience, what it feels like and what it looks like to be in a classroom setting, what the curriculum will be like, and meeting with teachers, and then even having their own peers working with them. And they would do lab experiences and things like that. So programs like that are very useful. One thing that we also did at UMD is we wrote a grant to bring high school students to campus and to tour the campus. We actually had them going to the gymnasium, to music rooms. We actually had one of the faculty do a storytelling. They ate lunch and then they went back. We brought them in by the school buses and then we brought them back to the school. So those types of experiments, I think, give them the idea that, hey, I can do this. I can go to college. And it's not so scary because they've been there. They've seen the campus. They've met the faculty. Another program too they had at UMD that I was a part of is they had a preceptorship program. So I do think internships are helpful. The students would go to the Indian healthcare facilities on different reservations throughout Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. And they would spend the summer there. And they would be in the clinics. And not every clinic looked like a hospital. Some of them were only like a trailer. So they got that hands-on experience working with their own people in their own communities, doing healthcare, whatever that might internship look like. So again, they get hands-on experience working towards a career, because not everyone, wants to work at a casino, right? And we have that kind of perception that we have, each of our reservations have casinos and maybe more than one. And that's not everyone's dream. So we need to let them know that there's other opportunities, other options out there, like create a pipeline, education to employment through internships, work experience, volunteer opportunities, things like that. And these opportunities should be happening on or near the reservations, because oftentimes the youth don't, they can't afford to travel far away. They want to be within their community. They want to stay with their family. So those are some of the things I would consider.
It's difficult. I always think about the retention of Indigenous students when I went to college. And I think a lot of my friends would go back home and on the weekends, and that was when we would, they would just stay there for one reason or another, all valid reasons. But there wasn't that hands-on like you and I, like you're talking about right now. In fact, when they did onboarding for us, they put us all in this one group way ahead of the actual event or the actual school starting, and it actually felt very isolating. Felt very different than maybe what you're talking about, which is much more intimate. So Joe, I want to throw the next question to you, if that's okay. It's great to see you. So you work on the same transition point, but in an urban native setting. Could you talk a little bit about maybe at first the difference between those two settings? And then what are the most urgent workforce needs you see among urban native learners? And how do you tailor AIOIC's programs to meet them?
Good morning, James. Happy to be here. So the American NYC works principally with the urban Indigenous community, and there are unique challenges when juxtaposed against tribal-based communities. I think first and foremost, many of our community members live within the urban core of the Twin Cities area. So there's a whole host of challenges there, from transportation, adequate childcare, housing, etc. What we have noticed through years of work that we put forward is the other major challenge is that the public school system, particularly in the Twin Cities, have been abhorrently lacking in providing adequate education and academic rigor for many communities of color, but in particular for American Indian students. This has been a generational problem. And so what we have noticed through our work, being in this kind of nexus point between education and workforce development, is that there remains a tremendous skills gap within our community. We've had a dropout rate from public education that has been north of 60% for well over 40 to 45 years. Just recently, the graduation rate for American Indian students in the state of Minnesota eclipsed 50%. And while they may be popping champagne corks at NDE over that data point, we know that this is not what we need to be. We are far short of the goals, and we can do better. The byproduct of these data points is that we have a large adult population that has a skills gap, and particularly when you are confronted with an economy where the rate of change in technology and know-how for these skilled positions continually grows at a really quick rate. So the American NYC has inserted itself there to provide both education to remediate these deficiencies within our community, as well as career training so that they can onboard within the economy at a quicker clip. In between there, we also provide a baseline of employment services to just get them into the workforce to start earning money while the trainings are taking place or while they're pursuing their educational pursuits, whether it's a high school diploma, a GED, or post-secondary certificates that are awarded. This has been a particular challenge, I think, across Indian country, but I think also especially so in the urban area. I think the other thing is, too, is when we talk to policymakers, whether it's in government or in philanthropy, those that fund this work, there continues to be a disconnect or a misconception about the nature of Native Americans, our reservation-based communities, and the urban population. A fundamental lack of understanding on how federal policy has impacted our communities and the differentiation between the urban community and the tribal-based communities. And again, those fingers are kind of pointed squarely back at public education. We don't really fault the individual. They just were never taught this. But case in point, as a result of termination and relocation policies by the federal government in the mid-20th century, it created a massive internal migration for American Indian people off of reservation-based communities on into urban centers, with the apparent goal of trying to find work and develop our communities economically. It didn't quite work out as planned in the 20th century because there was nothing there to receive our folks as they came off the buses. So there was a need to help address the skills gap for these new arrivals within the urban areas. And then there was also the creation of a very diverse population. So while as your intro expertly showed that there are 11 federally recognized tribes that share a boundary with the state of Minnesota, there are well over 60 tribal affiliations within the Twin Cities area. At our organization, we have nearly 39 different tribal affiliations reflected within our client pool. And this is a direct echo of termination relocation in this migration. So back to the policymakers and those that are in philanthropy, we get questions like, hey, Joe, which tribe do you work with? All of them. or we see funding mechanisms that are established to work with quote unquote tribal youth or selection of a tribe. Well, this makes it a bit problematic for the urban populations when we have such diversity of tribal affiliations that we aren't going to self-select to isolate one particular tribe that we want to work with. If they are indigenous and they come through our doors, they're welcome to receive the services. And I think, again, really not to castigate a dark shadow on policymakers or folks that establish these funding mechanisms. They just don't know. They don't know any better. They don't know the factual basis that in the state of Minnesota, 70% of Native Americans live off reservations in urban settings. And that nationally, that figure is about 60%. Many folks just still believe if you're Native, you live on the reservations, and that's where your home is. And this continues on here deep into the 21st century. So these are some of the unique challenges that we face as an organization in an urban setting, constantly having to address the skills gap that are confronting our communities while providing additional services in terms of providing this educative services to policymakers and folks in philanthropy.
It's a lot of work, a lot of different levels of work. And I forgot to mention to everybody, Dr. Campbell has a really great social policy document that we're going to share out with everybody, going over some of those policies and acts we talked about at the beginning of the conversation in greater depth. So please expect that. I don't think Mr. Blake has joined us yet, so he might get the pleasure of having the last 10 minutes all for himself. And so, Evie, I want to jump back to you then, if that's okay with you. We're talking about challenges just with regard to moving up through our lives, to education, through that pathway or pipeline that we were talking about. Evie, where do Indigenous learners most often encounter barriers on that journey from education to employment? Again, we were talking about that kind of almost an onboarding. And what strategies are in place to close the gaps between those barriers to education and employment?
Well, Joe did hit on our education and the problems within our education system. So we do have like less than half of our students graduating from high school. And a lot of it, has to do with the lack of that cultural understanding families and understanding that our Indigenous families live in multi-generational households. A lot of them, we live in our rural communities. There's a lot of poverty. And even if you look across the country, 13 of the poorest counties are on or near Indian reservations. So you can so if you magnify that, you can just see that, the life skills aren't there. There's a lack of education. I mean, if the parents aren't even graduating from high school, how do you expect the children to? There's that. You're not passing on that knowledge and understanding. And that's why it's so important to start with our youth and encouraging them and reminding them. There's not a lot of role models out there for Native people. So, representation is important. And you have to start with the youth. You have to start reminding them and letting them know that, hey, you can go on to college. You can go on to higher ed. You can go into a technical or community college and learn other skills that will have you can get a career out of. And what's interesting too is I find, because I have an 18-year-old son, I found out that, not a lot of the schools do have that counseling, that career counseling person in the school. And so you have to be the parent has to be that advocate, or they need somebody to come in and, from the schools into the classroom and say, hey, here's what you need to do to apply for school, to apply for financial aid, to do this, to do that. There's so many steps. And if you are a parent that never went to school or to higher education, you're not going to know that there's all these steps you have to take. And so we just need multiple people supporting our youth and showing them that this is the way that you can do it. And there's not just one way. I've talked to people about the 4 years to graduate, and it's like, don't say 4 years. Why say 4 years? Why can't it be 5 years?
Yeah.
Why can't we graduate in 5 years? And even going to a college, you don't have to take, you can have a gap year. I didn't know that was a thing until COVID. It was, I could have took a year off. What?
Yeah.
But I just jumped into college because that's what my parents were college educated. So I had that advantage, and not everyone has that advantage.
Yeah.
So it's like planting the seed and then reminding them that, yes, this is what they can do. These are their options.
And having those supports in place. That's a lot
Yes.
sometimes, isn't it? Well, Joe, I know you have those supports in place. So I want to just pivot the conversation a little bit to funding, if that's okay. You know, we know a lot of funding comes with very specific, sometimes rigid requirements that don't often fit the realities of the urban native communities. And not necessarily in the same category, but even just my short time with Deed, there's been multiple situations or experiences where we've seen changes to grants because of, just like you mentioned, misunderstanding with the culture. And once that understanding was made, those changes were easily changed. If that makes sense. Or it was, you know, they were able to change the grant requirements relatively quickly to meet that specific cultural reality. So my question for you is, how can funders and policymakers rethink those requirements or accountability so it supports that flexibility, innovation, and trust that's required in urban native communities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have been fortunate enough to participate in similar work during my 6 years of service on the Minnesota Job Skills Partnership Board, which Deed populates, and we actually set to work on the grant making apparatus there to address these issues. And so our community in the Twin Cities, we have a collaborative of over 27 Native American nonprofits that work together. It's called the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors Group. And we have the American NYC has spearheaded an initiative with this collaborative, what we refer to as equity and grant making. And this was targeting working with the Walz administration, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and the relevant state commissioners, basing this off the experiences I had at the MJSP, as well as when I served on the board of directors for the Greater Twin Cities United Way, which also took a hard look at restructuring the apparatus for their grant making procedures. There are things that can be done. First and foremost, I think it's really important to define culturally specific organizations or CBOs. This is incredibly important because there are a whole host of nonprofits throughout the Twin Cities and throughout the state of Minnesota, all have legitimate claims to a certain extent of the various demographics that they work with. But the reality is a culturally specific CBO like the American Indian OIC really endeavors to have a culturally contextualized experience for the client, meaning that our culture, our belief systems, our patterns of practice are all inculcated throughout the experience. This is particularly important for our educational services that we provide. We are able to do this because we are an Indigenous organization. Identifying these culturally specific organizations is important because it does create this culturally affirming environment, which really leads to success. However, there are other organizations that we work with natives, and so we get into this competitive spirit going after limited resources, and many folks in state agencies don't really know the difference. They just maybe sometimes are blinded by economies of scale. They really like the large organizations, but they don't understand that these large organizations aren't anchored within the base community. They don't reflect the constituency that uses their services, or they don't have the intelligence or the capabilities of providing culturally contextualized services. You can address this in the grant making processes. With the United Way and through the MJSP, we developed within the rubrics for evaluating grants ways to identify a culturally specific CBO. It was very simple, just an example. If you could check 2 out of these 3 boxes, you're considered a culturally specific organization. Your board of directors has bylaws that comprise a mandate that either the majority or 2/3 of it reflect the community you are situated in. The executive director reflects the constituency you are embedded in, and or the majority of your services are provided to clients that reflect the community that you are based in. So an example would be you are working within the Hmong community. The majority of your clients are Hmong clients. Your executive director is Hmong, and their board of directors has a mandate in their bylaws that it is comprised of 50% or more of Hmong community members. They would check all 3 boxes, therefore they would be constituted as a culturally specific organization. What this does is that it really puts these culturally specific organizations into a status where they can really work to access those resources, because oftentimes they're much smaller than some of these big dogs that are out there who may have clients that are Native American or Hmong, but they cannot provide the services in the way that culturally specific organizations can. These are important structural changes, refinements that can be incorporated into the evaluation process of grants. I would also say that if we really are about equity, if we really truly mean that we are about ending these disparities, then there are certain tenets that must be adopted. First and foremost, where the disparities are the worst, the investments must go there first. We see this oftentimes in philanthropy and in state agencies, what I refer to as the peanut butter methodology, where out of a need to placate or please a multitude of constituencies, the monies that are available for distribution through grant making processes are distributed equally amongst all of these various community members. Everybody gets the same amount across a wide spectrum of communities. Well, that's equality. That is not equity. And we will take those resources gladly and put them to use, but you're really not going to make a dent in the persistent disparities, particularly for those communities that have larger disparities than others. That leads to the second tenet, which is if you're really about equity and you really want to address disparities, then you must have a disproportionate investment where those disparities are terrible. Again, the peanut butter methodology, just giving a little bit to everybody isn't going to make a difference. You need to overinvest in those areas that are experiencing these disparities if you're going to level them up and end it. How can this be addressed within the grant making procedures or our pursuits through the equity grant making? Your scoring mechanisms. If you represent a community that has these disparities, you could have weighted or priority points awarded in that scoring metric and the rubric that's used. If you reflect certain particular areas of interest that are being addressed, like educational needs or workforce development, and that's your specialty, you could give priority points to that organization that is doing that work. These are structural differences that will rechannel the money in a way that is more consistent with authentic equity development, where you attack the disparities that are worst, you go there first, and you have a disproportionate investment. And then you also can identify authentic, culturally specific, community-based organizations by just using these kind of litmus tests as part of the rubric and scoring mechanisms. This prevents, culturally specific organizations from being elbowed or boxed out of the competitive process by much larger, more opaque firms that have huge staffing patterns, large development offices that have a slim portion of their demographic services reflected by these communities. They may provide services to Native Americans. They may provide services to Hmong Americans, but they are just a generic, large nonprofit. And so therefore they're not culturally specific, and therefore they cannot provide authentic, culturally contextualized, culturally affirming services. And so I think these are things that you can embed structurally. And then I would say, in the equity and grant making, how the review process occurs. We know, I've been around in this work for 20 years. We know that these review processes seldom check a lot of the boxes about community review, authorities in the field that can come in and speak to the work, that can recognize authentic programming and can vet it. There have been attempts at this at DEED. I was a participant in the original Pathways to Prosperity grant awards. I was a community reviewer that looked at grants submitted from Western Minnesota, so there would be no conflict of interest. I brought with it my experience in the field and the authority that I could have in doing this work and evaluating these processes. That's what we need to see more of, a greater transparency and greater inclusion in the review process. And what we need to get away from is faceless bureaucrat staff members in state agencies that take a stack of grants, look around at a couple of colleagues, say, look, there's 5 of us, there's 30 grants. If we divide it up 6 by 6, we can bang this out by the end of the day and be out of here by 5 p.m. And then we don't get any feedback. Oftentimes we'll get an acceptance, award letter, a declination letter, and that's it. And while we're grateful for the money, we need that information about what worked in our grant application or what didn't work. That is, as a former teacher, you don't just issue grades to students without giving their work back to them so they can learn from it, so they can progress and further develop. And we see this all too often with state agencies and in philanthropy, where they have hard deadlines with quick turnarounds in the submission process that we have to then all hands on deck to get it submitted. And then we don't hear from them. It's an information black hole for a long time. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we'll get an acceptance letter, an award letter. Terrific. Or we'll get a declination letter, usually stating just so many people, too many people applied, and we only have so many funds. But we don't get our work handed back to us. We don't understand what worked in our application or any kind of critical constructive feedback that we could improve ourselves, which then if you then take that and couple it with how the money was distributed, and if you see evidence of the peanut butter methodology, it doesn't pass the smell test that something authentic towards equity development is happening. It looks more of a political easiness to it, or something to just get the work done. And that's what's compromising this state's ability to authentically address disparities and reduce them. And so these very simple and very doable structural reforms within grant making processes and procedures, the rubrics and evaluation process, the transparency of the evaluation process, and the feedback would go a long way to making a very big difference. And so those are the things that we advocate for. We've seen some state agencies, DEED has been kind of on the leading edge of this, but we've seen other state agencies really behind the eight ball on this. And so I think that we need some sort of codification to get everybody moving in the right direction. If we're serious as a state and as a community about addressing disparities in a meaningful way.
I have like 1,000 questions and comments. But first off, something you said before that you didn't say in this conversation that I think makes a lot of sense and is a thoughtful way of saying is equity work is not equitable. If we're trying to balance out the systems, it's not going to be equitable at first. Emmy, I want to talk to you about what Joe mentioned about anchoring in the base of community. But first, I want to bring Mr. Robert Blake into the conversation, if I may. Hey, Bob, it's so good to see you. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. Glad to be here. I am currently in Virginia, Minnesota, and just got off stage here. We were talking about the Mesabi Metallics and all the workforce development opportunities up here. They're going to be happening. So yeah, it was really exciting conversation to be a part of. And to be a part and glad to be here with all of you now. So, and I am actually in the hockey rink. I am here's the
cool.
I am. Where else would you be at if you were in Hibbing, right? Hockeytown, USA. Yeah. I'm in a hockey rink. So glad to be here with y'all.
You sound great. So thanks for coming. I think you heard Joe mention that sometimes finding partnerships or agency follow-up isn't as smooth or as effective as we would like. And talking to different individuals and organizations across the state, I kind of hear the same thing with regard to private organizations in the same way we hear about this as state agencies. And so, what's, in your opinion, and I know you work with a lot of other organizations, you bring in organizations, what signals that a company is serious and not just placating a little bit, like having those conversations, acting interested, and then not following up or not coming back to the conversation. How do you know if a business is really sincere about creating a meaningful partnership? And what kind of systems do you put in place to create a sense of accountability for both groups?
Yeah, great question, James. I'll just point out, the relationship we have with Xcel Energy at Native Sun, and we were in part of their Power Up program. So we were doing workforce development and training, and we were putting those folks on the biggest solar project being built in the state of Minnesota, 500 megawatts. And so we were able to get folks involved in that project. Also, Haleen Solar Panel Factory, we've been able to get, we've been doing their workforce development for them too. And we've been able to get folks, from there too. And so what I thought was really good from their perspectives is that they were willing to help with wraparound services, help with, work with the folks that didn't have vehicles to be able to come to the job site. So I think it's just those kinds of things that they're trying to understand the individual situation and then trying to best to work with them. So that's what's been really positive about working with Xcel Energy and Haleen Solar Factory in Rogers, Minnesota.
That kind of relates to what we talk about with the Minnesota Indigenous Workforce Initiative, where we need to enter that space in the spirit of transformation as opposed to transaction. And I think it kind of comes out like that, right? It's not about an organization or a private enterprise saying, we have 8 seats, bring people over, we'll hire them, like a quota situation. It's more like, let's meet that demographic where it's at. Let's meet that workforce where it's at and recognize what their specific challenges are. Bob, we're probably going to expand on that in a little bit here, even though we have 10 minutes left. We have a lot of questions. But I do want to come back to you, Evie, if that's okay, right away, and talk about that anchoring within the base of communities when it comes to funding and so forth. Joe called it having, making sure that there's a culturally contextualized experience. I think that's the way you worded it, Joe, with regard to some of these grants and policies. And Evie, you've talked about community voices before. And so we're hearing elders, youth, families. How do you ensure that those voices shape workforce programs so they align with cultural values and long-term nation building?
Well, part of what we did is we created, we have a strategic plan that includes that. So in the strategic plan, it says we want to remain relevant and effective for our members. We want to broaden our client base. We want to enhance synergy among band members. And we want to create a unified approach to serving the community and achieving common goals. So I think that's important in terms of like saying it out loud, that this is what we're going to be doing. We want to service our members, and how are we going to do that? So we have action steps. We want to explore new ways to reach clients and members. We want to get stakeholders involved. We want to form partnerships. We've also launched like a social media campaign as well, where now we have Minnesota Chippewa Tribe now has a Facebook account, if you can believe that. So, because we're I feel like we're still kind of antiquated here with some of the work that we do. You know, we really haven't changed much in 40, 50 years, and it's kind of like moving into a new age, and that's what we're trying to do here. And we're updating our webpage. So those are ways to get people involved. We have quarterly meetings where we go out to the different reservations every quarter, where the public's invited to come and attend and hear what programs we're offering and what we're doing, giving updates. So we do a lot of that type of outreach. And so some of these outcomes is that we want to increase funding for our work. We want to get out there and let people know who we are. We want to create goodwill. We want to, let people know the good work that we're doing, and increase our capacity as well. And looking at new programs, because, in this new age, we're all looking at ways to enhance services, to get funding. So we're always looking at new mechanisms for doing that. And we're kind of looking at healthcare too, how we can use that to our advantage.
It is a new age, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about data sovereignty at the beginning of this conversation, like, data as a resource, and how do we engage with that in an equitable and honorable way? So Bob, I would like to come back to you right away, if that's okay, continuing to talk about this idea of equity and sovereignty. You've described energy sovereignty as, I think you called it was referred to as a just transition. But how would true economic reconciliation look between that clean energy sector, the private sector, part of which you are a part of, and tribal nations? And how can workforce development serve as that bridge?
Yeah, great question, James. I think, first of all, just the fact that if we look at our energy needs in the future, take for instance Twin Cities, we're going to need 3 to 5 times more of that in the next 10 years as we move forward, right? Yeah. So we are going to need energy everywhere. And I would ask someone out there right now, ask your 10-year-old to put down their iPhone. You're going to have a hard time doing that, okay? And that takes energy. So when you think about the opportunities, and the technology is here right now for us to be able to create our own tribal utilities, for us to be able to create all of our energy right there in our communities that we then can distribute. And remember too, James, these jobs, they are very technical jobs. So, our folks are going to have to get more inclined with on how to work all of these different systems, the SCADIA systems and whatnot. And, what I say, and when you introduce education into communities, the more education, you got more people doing that, using their analytical skills, sharpening them. I always say, man, the less dumb stuff is going to happen. You know what I mean? So, so I'm all about, having these technical careers in our community and us being in control of it. But when I think about Red Lake, for example, that sends $40 million off the reservation each year for their electricity bill, and we could put $40 million back into our communities, creating our own jobs and our own opportunities. Like, I'm just amazed by this. And I'll tell you, the last thing I'll end on this, James, is that when I built the first solar project up in Red Lake, when those guys, when we were doing the job, they just said, Bob, this feels really good. We're doing something positive for the community. We're also doing something positive, for the environment. And Bob, I want to do more of this. Like right then and there, I realized I got at something that was more powerful than anything, and that was purpose. Like, this individual had purpose. Now they wanted to do something, and I think that that's the main thing that I see with renewable energy. And I always say that healing is in the environment. Once we start healing the environment, we'll start healing that relationship with ourselves and with one another. So that's why I'm really super excited about this, and the opportunities are abundance for tribal communities, because we are like the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy.
Oh man, that's great. So this brings a nice intersection that you just brought up, Bob. I'd like to direct the next question to Joe. We're talking about, Bob mentioned technology, right? We're at a new age. We have to change how we're teaching individuals. We got to keep up with the technology gap. And you also brought up sovereignty again, Bob. And I think the first time I met with you at the Governor's Workforce Development Board, that was one of the first things you brought up. And so I think the concept of sovereignty is being addressed and considered differently now by non-native people. And I would like to think it's in a more healthy way. I'd love to hear your opinion. But Joe, as a center of urban education, the AIOIC has been a gathering place for, was it 50 years now? Since 1968, 9?
79. So
79. Oh,
years.
good grief. Okay. Well, how has your role, or how has the AIOIC's role in workforce and education evolved? And what lessons from that history still guide your work today?
Yeah, it's been a long haul since our corporation in 1979 and our doors opened. And at that time, we began with just baseline economic triage of workforce development, trying to connect the unemployed with employment opportunities, helping them with a modicum of like resume development, that kind of thing. Slowly, we began to kind of wade into the waters of skills development. We had actually typing, and we got our toe in the water of computers. But this took on more structure as we added the post-secondary career trainings. We added a Minnesota Department of Education state-approved ABE GED consortia, and then in the mid-90s we created a high school, Dakota Prep, which is under contract with Minneapolis Public Schools. It's an accredited high school that is actually a Minneapolis Public School under that contract. And what we learned was, and it kind of goes back to what those comments I made earlier, is with the really continually abhorrent performance of public education, I would get questions about, Joe, why are so many Native Americans failing within public education when you look at those data points? And the reality is they're not. They're making a spirit-saving decision to exit a very noxious environment. The methodologies used for teaching and learning are very Western European dominated. They are very individualized. They really kind of tear down and denigrate community kinship and building learning spaces where the whole collective learns together. And then our histories at best were omitted, at worst were openly mocked, and then having to suffer the indignities of doing social activities in your public schools by going to a football game on Friday night and watching your team put on, helmets and whatnot that have insulting mascots. And so I think to get out of that environment, to save their cultural identities and their sense of spirit was a smart move. The problem was we didn't have anything to receive them on the other end. And so what we learned over the development of our organization for these past 47 years is that when you provide a culturally supportive, a culturally contextualized environment for these learning spaces to operate, engaging in those learned pedagogical strategies, those learning strategies that we know work for our community, weirdly, people want to attend those schools. People want to attend those classes. The parents vote with their feet by bringing their youth to these schools and these programs. And so we found this third way of supporting and utilizing our culture, our practices, and inculcating it within the curriculum at every turn, but then really hard hammering home the 3 R's, the academic rigor. And we not only do that for our youth and our high school programs and our adult learners in the adult basic education GD learning, we also try to weave that into the career trainings that we have. And so therefore, students that have had negative experiences with informalized education can come into a space that is warm, inviting, and supportive. And when you have that, ultimately we need to be honest about what teaching and learning involves. It involves a huge amount of vulnerability. The individual has to acknowledge that they don't have a certain knowledge base and they're dependent upon somebody teaching them how to do this for themselves. And that is a powerful responsibility for that environment that's providing those learning services. And so being supportive, being warm, having the culturally affirming services or inculcating into the curriculum creates a space that people want to attend, and they're more open to embracing that vulnerability, and they're more open to learning. And that's why, for our academic pursuits that we've had at our high school and our GD, they're eclipsing state averages and local high school averages. And that's why we see such high, heavy foot traffic in our career trainings, because folks feel safe to come in here and learn. And I think that's the preeminent challenge. The rate of change in technology and everything else in the modern economy is at the top of a J curve. You bend down to tie your shoe and you stand back up and everything in your office is obsolete all of a sudden. So how do you continually train and retrain the workforce to be able to adapt and navigate within that? Well, it begins by providing these quality learning spaces that folks welcome and want to be welcome to. Going from there, it's just a constant review pattern of curriculum and needs and marketable, viable skill set development going forward. But addressing those areas, we know our people can learn. Our people can be just as sophisticated and talented as anybody else in this nation. We just need to create those learning environments that speak to us as a community, and we're not alone. Other communities of color have unique learning tastes as well, or formulas that work for them. And really, that's why I think we see this persistent achievement gap in public education, is this industrialized Western European model that they are trying to cram and everyone into, or force feed into all these communities, and it's not working. So, it just stands to reason, as a former teacher, you need to diversify how you teach. You can't just lecture all the time, because you got to activate the different learners in the classroom. Just by extrapolation, shouldn't you differentiate your delivery service, your delivery models as well, to activate the learning in different communities? And shouldn't you reflect the desires of those communities and what they want? And so that's what we've learned over our 40 years, is we've added in all of these training components, is how best to reflect the desires and the ways to engage our community that best suits them as learners. And we found success doing it. So it's not really a secret. It's pretty common sense. It's a matter of doing it.
Yeah, and that transitions over to workforce also, right? If we can do that in education, an organization can do that also. With
100%. And I think just the final point is, when we think about workforce development, we really need to embrace the concept of lifelong learning. There is no endpoint to your training. You're going to have to go back into a classroom at some time to level up your skill sets, whether it's to learn a new database and program, some new interface with technology. And so we need to understand that these learning environments are paramount to sustaining our workforce. So folks are going to have to continually come back and re-engage in development and trainings along the way. Once we do that in a more sophisticated way, in a more democratic way, reflective of these diverse communities, I think we'll be better off as a state.
And it can be an act of joy, right?
Yeah.
For lack of a better way of saying it, it can be fun. Man, I have so many more questions for everybody, but we do have to transition to our unplugged session. But before I do that, I would like to introduce our audience to something called wait for this for a second. All right, folks. We will send this slide deck out to everybody. I want to introduce everybody to the Minnesota Indigenous Energy Workforce Initiative. This was an initiative started by Great River Energy, specifically a woman named Annette Kuiper, who is working with DEED, us, to co-facilitate a pipeline or pathway opportunity for Indigenous workers into green, renewable, and sustainable energy. The overarching goal is to align Minnesota's energy sector workforce needs with the strengths, values, and sovereignty of Indigenous communities. And the work honors technical expertise and cultural intelligence in equal measure, building an alliance grounded in mutual benefit, belonging, and purpose. This is a very exciting project. If you're interested in learning more, we just don't have enough time to talk about it. Annette's contact information is in our chat. Otherwise, you can always reach out to me at any point and talk about this. I just want to say thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience for coming forward. This was a heady conversation. I'm happy we get to continue it for 30 more minutes with Becky. But before we do that, I wanted to transfer the microphone over to Shayla Drake, who will introduce next month's Workforce Wednesday.
Hi, everyone. So thank you all for your great conversation today. And a big thank you again to our panelists for your insights. And as always, we appreciate your feedback. So we want to take a moment to pop the survey in the chat. And we would like to get you all to complete that, because this is how we provide you the content. This is how we know what you want. And this is how we continue to make these sessions even better. And then those of you that registered, the recording and any related resources are going to be sent out. Just give us a couple, day or two, a little bit of grace to get that all together for you. And then registration is open for next month's Workforce Wednesday. We're doing a 2025 year in review. So what we're going to do is it's going to be the Workforce Strategy Consultant team. And we're basically going to do a look back of the year, bring out the highlights of our sessions, and kind of reshare the related resources, the best practices, and the best highlights of information that is critical to help our employers grow and succeed. Next slide. So with that, we're going to feel free to reach out to any of us on our Workforce Strategy Consultant team if you have any questions or you would like to explore consultation opportunities. And then so what we're going to do is we're going to transition over to our unplugged session. And during this session, you'll be able to unmute yourself. You can turn your camera on and you can ask questions directly to our panelists if you choose. So we're going to make that transition now and continue the conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Becky.
Awesome. Thank you, Shayla. Thank you, James. Thank you, panelists. I'm excited to be able to lead this unplugged session and continue our conversations. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be focusing on that. And this is really our space to pause and step away from those systems, metrics, and strategies. And instead, now we can talk about healing, belonging, reciprocity, and meaning. So these are the parts of workforce development that rarely show up in the data, and they share the human experience of work more than anything else. So I think to get us started, I think, Evie, I will start with you. So many Indigenous learners carry intergenerational trauma into classrooms and workplaces. So from your perspective, how can workforce programs intentionally create healing-centered spaces that support both learning and personal restoration?
Okay, so that's a little tough because, each, at UMD, we were able to smudge in the classroom. So in some spaces, we can bring our cultural items and our cultural healing into this space. I actually do site visits for CD facilities that are located on the reservations, and they have a cultural room. So in that space, they could do their medicines as well as other activities like beadwork. They actually create a lodge. They do smudging. I mean, so there's like these cultural components. And so, to be aware of that, and then maybe even talking to the staff or the employees that are native and saying what will make this space welcoming and open. Because even for me as a professor, I would put my birch bark baskets, my beadwork, everything on the walls to show, to indicate that not only am I native, but I support the native community. Here's my space. And I would do that for other communities as well if I needed to. Because everybody could put artwork in their spaces. They could do other things in their spaces to show that they're supporting that particular community. And then we have to be aware of unconscious bias, which is, perceptions about stereotypes that we carry about certain populations. And to know that, there's also those microaggressions, which are contemporary trauma that happens when you do something, and you may do it unintentionally, may not even know that that's offensive. Some people don't know that Indian mascots are offensive. So you might have to educate people and say, hey, that's offensive, and this is what I'm going to tell you. This is, and I'll tell you why. Create those open spaces where conversation can happen. And workers, employers should be talking to Indigenous people or reading books, watching movies, going to a powwow that was mentioned earlier. Those kind of things would, kind of broaden your perspective and maybe kind of reduce or eliminate some of those biases and stereotypes.
I love that. Thanks. I know a lot of the employers that we work with they don't know what they don't know, right? So it's about educating yourself. And I know for me personally, I really want to attend a powwow. That is on my bucket list. So thanks for bringing that up. I think there may be a website with that information. Maybe we could throw in the chat too. So thank you for that. Joe, I'm going to switch over to you. So Evie's insight connects beautifully with the work that you do at the AIOIC. Hopefully I said that right.
You sure did.
Awesome. Many urban Native people come to AIOIC not just looking for a job, but for connection and belonging. So how does your programs help foster that sense of community and resilience alongside the skill building?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's kind of the centerpiece, our secret sauce, if you will, for our work. As I mentioned throughout this process, we really endeavor to have a culturally contextualized experience. So at every turn, we try to embed it within the curriculum that is used. But it goes beyond that to the aesthetic choices we use within our building, from the artwork that we display, to how we engage with our community. We oftentimes host community events just as an extension of our educational services, Native author panels, these sorts of things. And what that does is, number one, when you come through our doors, you're going to have hopefully an indelible Indigenous experience. You're going to walk into a space that cannot help but have that Native drip, as the kids say. You're going to feel it, you're going to see it, you're going to hear it. We have our language on signs around the building. Whenever possible, we speak with our language. We open up our meetings, and as we say in a good way, through smudging and an invocation, we do spirit plates in our community festivals. So that is paramount to really rooting ourselves as an Indigenous organization. But beyond that, it is the act of being in community. We know we learn better that way. We know that we share our stories in that way. The wisdom and the transfer of knowledge occurs when we are in community with ourselves. There is a feeling of belonging. There is a sense of that community brings about a sense of purpose, that you aren't there just for your own individual advancement, but that you have your families and the remaining community around you to look after. And in the Lakota tradition, my tradition, our family's tradition, we call it, your family is the Tawahe, and then your extended family by choice, the community is the Tioshve. And the community success is completely dependent upon every individual family's success, and in inverse as well. Every family's success is dependent upon the wider community's success. So bringing folks together, having them have these shared experiences, whether it's in the classroom as a cohort moves together and progresses through their trainings, or in these community spaces that we host, our open house in May, or our feast that we have, or these special community engagements. That also brings the ability for people to feel good about themselves, to reconnect with their Indigenous roots and traditions. And that is the energy that sustains what we refer to as resilience, I suppose. That's what keeps us going. I think from my perspective and kind of my ear to the ground, we're getting kind of tired of hearing resilience, which is kind of code for enduring. We're more about thriving. And so we're building the world in which we want to occupy, where we can all thrive. And that can only be done by linking arms with our community members and making sure that the people to our right and the people to our left are doing okay as well. So these are all the elements that we have, that we work really hard to have in the American Indian OIC, in our campus and in our learning spaces.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, Bob, you're up next. So you've spoken before about how clean energy work can be a form of empowerment. So how can energy projects, especially those led by the tribal nations, become spaces of healing and empowerment, just not employment.
Yeah, absolutely. That right there, is I always, I said this in a call on Native America Calling. Native people, we're in the gaming business, which is a billion-dollar business, and I'm very proud of that. I mean, I've received 3 college degrees because my tribe is in the gaming business, right? But we need to be in the energy business. That's a trillion-dollar business, and so I always say we're in the wrong business, everybody. When I think about the opportunities that these distributed energy resources can do for these communities, and like I said on the last time I said it was like 40 million that we could put back into our communities. I mean, that root cause of a lot of our problems is poverty. So I think if we attack poverty through these energy resources, and not only that though, but we can also be leaders in this space too. Here in the state of Minnesota, we were able to form the first tribal advisory council on energy. That took 5 years. That took 5 years to get done, but here in Minnesota, we got that done. And now that is a model for the rest of the country to follow. So eventually, that will turn into a tribal utilities commission that will work in conjunction with Public Utilities Commission. And the great thing about that is that tribes now have a seat at the table when energy decisions are being made around all these different pipelines. Pipelines take, for example, everyone. We'll have a say. We'll have a seat at the table. So I think it's all of those opportunities that really, and it's because of the technology now. The technology's here that we're able to really do this. And so that's what's really exciting about this. And that's how I see energy sovereignty, uplifting tribal sovereignty. And I would say to people too, if you believe in democracy, then you believe in strengthening tribal sovereignty, because the framers of the Constitution knew at one time there was going to be a corporate oligarchy that was going to try and take over this country. And they knew that the only thing standing between us and them and this whole thing becoming a Hunger Games movie was tribal nations. So everyone, if you believe in democracy, then you definitely believe in tribal nations and sovereignty and energy sovereignty. So that's where I see all that kind of coming and playing together.
Thank you. That's great. That's
Becky.
a lot of, yeah.
Becky, can I
James.
jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
Bob, we have a question from the audience I'd like to ask you here. This is from Chris Kirschbaum. She asks, how can local businesses, and she's acting very practically here, how can local businesses partner with schools, tribal programs, or youth organizations to support Indigenous workforce development? What can they do right now?
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, the greatest kept secret in the state of Minnesota is that the tribes have 11 job training centers. And what's crazy about that is, when I was on the Governor's Workforce Development Board, I was able to see the money, the way it came down from the feds, came to the state, came down to the county, came down to the program. It hit all these different buckets, and all these different buckets have all these administration costs. And then what happens is the money comes from the feds. It goes right into the workforce development programs in tribal nations. So everyone, the tribe's got a perfect opportunity that all of you can partner with their workforce development centers. It's already there. And what's unfortunate is most of the times, a lot of these tribes have to send money back to the federal government. So, I mean, think about that. How can you as businesses partner with tribes? How can you as businesses work with tribes in a more collaborative way that you'll be able to provide a pipeline of workers for your needs and for your business? So that would be the one thing that I would as a business and look into, is partnering with the tribes and figuring out a way that you can work with their workforce development centers.
Awesome.
Was that good, James?
It was okay. Just kidding. It was great.
I'm sure that
I'll throw it
answers
back
the
to Becky.
question. That's great.
Those natives.
Okay, so let's jump back to Evie and let's keep going. We got about 10 minutes left. Workforce systems often focus on individuals. So their education, their job placement, their advancement, but Indigenous communities, well-being is collective. So how do you keep families and communities at the center of workforce development conversations?
Well, typically when they come in, they bring their whole family. So I get to meet the whole family when they come into our space, and we create a space that's welcoming to their children. I have games and coloring books, and I have treats. And I just feel like if they bring their whole family, then they're going to be engaged and more invested. We ask them questions about childcare. We ask them how their kids are doing in school. We have a whole assessment tool that we use that covers every aspect of their life, from transportation to childcare to housing. So it's very holistic, it's very inclusive. And so we get to know the family very well. We never tell them, don't bring your kids or don't bring your partner. We always say, everyone's welcome. And then we address each of their concerns. If they have issues with the kids in school, we try and say, okay, what can we do to help? Do you need things purchased for them to be in school, backpacks or whatever? I mean, there's just a huge range. And actually, Tribal TANF, if anyone's familiar with that program, that's where the money comes directly from the federal government to the tribes. And so then they can create their own programs. And that's what we need to do. In terms of funding, is we need to have that government to government relationship with the band, with the federal government, with the bands, and then determine our own outcomes in the way we do our own programming, rather than the government telling us what they want and having these outcomes, these participation hours. That stuff just doesn't work for us. So then we end up being creative about, well, then our participation hours will include cultural activities. It will include ricing. It'll include fishing. It'll include these other, going to powwows and selling beadwork. So, we've gotten pretty good at, being creative at meeting the needs of our people.
Great, thank you. I see some questions in the chat. Maybe I should throw those out there and make it more interesting, right? So let's go with this question. So how can we attract Indigenous workers to healthcare jobs such as assisted living facility? And any of you can chime in. Any ideas on that one?
I'll jump in. Some of the work we do with our relationships with our corporate partners. There's a couple of things. So first and foremost, I think with the ongoing discussions we have with our corporate partners and others, is with their HR departments and how they vet their candidates. We still see a lot of these employers just having the ubiquitous college degree, 5 years experience, college degree, 5 years experience. And those are laudable goals to have. And of course, we value college education, but there are many other ways in which you can address the labor needs of your organization by looking at certificates, looking at folks that have other industry validated credentials that can do this work. And really, you can reduce some costs associated with that. Oftentimes, when you're seeking someone with a 4-year education, they're coming with a debt load, and they're going to have certain levels of expectancy about what they would like to earn. And so you're going to have to set that price point about who your new hire is going to be at a level that's going to draw in and attract that kind of talent. However, as we advocate, if you start looking at what skill sets are needed to get the job done, perhaps you can reconfigure these position descriptions to incorporate certifications, industry recognized credentials, and perhaps reduce that price point because the levels of expectancy are a little bit different. And the case we make is like in our IT training programs, many folks with a 4-year degree are expecting somewhere north of $85,000 as a starting wage. Whereas our folks come out with a certificate in this can do the work. If you were to offer them $65,000 to start out, that would be absolutely transformative for them and for their family members. So it is a benefit for our community. It will draw the attention of the future labor force, and it's a benefit to the employer as well. And so we continue to advocate to reconfigure how these open positions are being posted and what are the actual requirements you need to do the job versus just cut and paste, bachelor's degree, 5 years experience. The other thing is retention of talent. And I think that's another discussion with HR services. There are cultural applications for Indigenous people that are not similar to Western European expectations, and to understand that within the workspace, it goes a long ways for Indigenous folks to feel comfortable and want to be there. One of the most lowest hanging pieces of fruit that we could talk about in this discussion is when we talk about funeral leave. For Western Europeans, 1 day of funeral leave should be sufficient. Well, sorry for your loss. We'll see you when you come back. We have, depending on your tribal affiliation, many different protocols and observations within our ceremonial practices. Many necessitate multiple days off for funeral leave. And so we have encountered Native qualified, highly talented Native individuals that left an employer because of their cultural blindness. Whether it's they wouldn't allow them to have 4 days off or funeral leave or certain other observations that were not permissible within the workspace. So understanding what is a way to be truly inclusive within the workspace and looking at your HR practices to invite in these multicultural applications. And we actually had an employer talk about their various ways of doing multicultural applications. They had a Taco Tuesday to recognize Latino people. And, after we got done smacking our palms into our faces, it really suggested that there's a lot more work and learning to be done on the employer side. So these are just some of the easy softball things that we can look at to attract talent and to retain talent. If you really interested in diversifying your labor pool and really interested in getting Indigenous folks to work for you.
All right. Thank you. A lot of great information in there, Joe. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat, so hopefully we can get to those after the session today. But I do want to take this time, and because we're wrapping up here on time, one final question for each of you. So maybe let's close with a thought employers can carry forward. Maybe one piece of advice for those who truly want to become an employer of choice for Native talent. So, Abby, why don't we start with you? If you have something that you'd like to share, and then Bob, and then Joe.
Well, this goes back to another question too. I wanted to wrap up with that. A lot of the tribes do have girls and boys clubs. And so I think too, if you want to connect with our Indigenous youth, that would be a place to go. And just talking to them and letting them know what their options are. A lot of our kids don't know what their options are out there when it comes to employment and jobs and what kind of experience they need, whether it's education or job experience. You just need to make those connections with the youth and let them know what their options and opportunities are. Miigwech.
Yeah, I'll just end with don't talk at me, talk with me. It's as simple as that. Respect. I know when someone's talking at me, and I know when someone's talking with me. So I'm probably going to tune you out if you start talking at me. So I think it's just simple. Just have respect and just know that we have the same hopes and dreams as just like you and everyone else, and we want to be able to feed our families and do those things. So that's what I would leave these employers here on with now.
I would just echo my colleagues. If you come to us with respect in your heart, I know sometimes we get tripped up about what do I say, Native American, American Indian, how do I address you? If you have respect in your heart, we can talk together. And I think just building off that to contemporize your thinking about Indigenous people, we're not stuck in the back pages of your history books. We're your neighbors. Unfortunately, many of us are Vikings fans. I mean, we have the same hopes and dreams that you all do. And so just if you come at us in a truthful way with respect and humility, and I think to Bob's point, well, just talk with us and we will level with you, and together we'll create the future we want.
Love that. Great. And then one other thing that came to mind before we sign off is, are there any books or resources, if somebody really wants to dive deep into maybe some of the bias or microaggressions or just learning, is there any recommendations that you all would have that we could
If
take?
you're in the Twin Cities area, in kind of the western Minneapolis side by Lake Leal, Birch Bark Books, owned by Pulitzer Prize winning author Louis Sertich. They have a fantastic, massive section on contemporary issues with Indigenous folks. Plus, it's just a great bookstore. Get a cup of coffee, go in there, spend a day. There's tons of books, great authors. Anything by Anton Chur or David Chur, those two folks, they write terrific books. There's just so much. It's a great place to start. Otherwise, if you're not in that area, go to a Barnes and Noble and find that section that has some Indigenous books there. Once you start, you'll kind of check the author to make sure that they're Indigenous themselves, that it's not somebody from outside the culture telling you about ourselves. We're pretty good at doing it ourselves.
Yeah, I would just say, since I'm up here in Virginia, Minnesota, check out the American Indian Community Housing Organization, ACO. They do wonderful work over there. They got a great gift shop, by the way, you all. You know, I would suggest taking a stroll through there and seeing the folks, and then being able to take a look and see what they have, you know, on hand there. I know they got some books there, so I don't know what books they got, but I know that they got some pretty good ones there.
Great.
Yeah, I can just add, come spend money at my casino. That's another way. And if you're on a college campus, a lot of them have American Indian Learning Resource Centers. So there you go.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all again. I can't believe it's time. We have a lot of great information. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.
We'll put up for the opportunity. Talk shop.
Big witch.
You go out again.
Big Witch.
Bye. Big Woods.